Are the rest of you coming down from upstairs?
Oh,
No?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We are going to get started. Are we? Yeah. Okay. I know some of you are our students, but is there anyone here who's new to the studio school? Oh, awesome. Well, in that case, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. The Washington Studio School is actually about to celebrate its 40th anniversary next year, so we're very happy about that exactly. And we continue to be a place of immersive art education. I'm very proud to be a part of this legacy that was started 40 years ago. We focus mainly on drawing, painting, sculpture, and printmaking. But our exhibition programming, as you can see, expands beyond that. So we are especially thrilled to welcome our visiting guest speaker today, Chris Combs. Chris is a Washington, D.C. based artist. And he also has a studio in Mount Rainier in Maryland. And I really, as I was going through Chris's bio, it was so spot on reading through it, but also very disconcerting. And not his bio, but rather the artist statement. Through handmade and custom fabricated hardware, software, and enclosures, the electronic sculptures of Chris Combs respond to themes of surveillance, control, and algorithmic bias, and the viewer using facial recognition and motion sensing. He works with a wide range of practices to create circuit boards, software, and enclosures for his sculptures, which both embrace and question technology. Chris is a 3-time recipient of the DCCAH Arts and Humanities Fellowship program and was shortlisted for the 2021 Aesthetica Art Prize. He's a graduate of the Corcoran College of Art and Design and was a photo editor for National Geographic, which is so cool. He joined the Otis Street Arts Project in 2021. I'm super excited. I think we all love cats. So that's really why I wanted Chris to come and talk tonight. So thank you and welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thanks, y'all. It's really a privilege to be here. I have been hearing about the studio school for really all of my life growing up in this area, went to Georgetown, Bethesda, here. And it, for whatever reason, just never quite connected. And it's such a privilege to be here. And I really want to acknowledge and thank both everyone here at the studio school who made this possible. You know, many of you are here today. Thank you. Thank you very much for putting on this show and opening your doors to randos like me. And also to Tiffany Williams for curating this show, which I really kind of appreciate the way things are arranged. So many thanks to all who had a part in that. So here's me. I don't know if you noticed it's the same person. I wanted to talk a little bit about the artworks that I have here in this room, because you may have seen them already, maybe not, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about each artwork and just dig straight into visuals and artwork instead of spieling about myself. Because, you know, we like looking at pictures, right? Let's look at some pictures about these artworks and how they were made, and that will kind of address some questions people may have about process. So the first one I want to talk about is the easiest. We're going to talk about point of sale. So it's right over there. It is a point of sale display. POS is like the term in the industry for things that are cash registers, essentially. So a POS display like this one is used to show how much your purchases cost. And so I took that as sort of a prompt in the darkest times of the early days of the pandemic. I was like, wow, what are the costs of these things that I am having to chase all over to get? You know, when we're all like, you know, panically buying like toilet paper, like what is this actually doing to the planet? What is it doing to me? What are the effects of capitalism? Like, what is it, me being so consumerist and like hoarding, like what are the effects of this? And those are the real kind of costs of some purchases. I was interested in that. I wanted to make an artwork about it. So the first part was kind of figuring out like how to actually use a point of sale display. Oh, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge curation wise, like look how I'm next to Trey's piece here. Like this is perfect. Couldn't ask for more. Thank you. So I had to figure out how to actually use a cash register display because these are pretty like industry specific. And like a lot of the materials that I appreciate the aesthetics of and I want to get working, they're not really intended for randos or normies. Like no one tells you how to use this thing. There is a manual about like how you screw it to the like table, but it doesn't tell you like, hey, hook it up to a computer and send text into it this way. None of that stuff is clear. So I had to actually like reverse engineer it. And the way that that worked in my world was basically just sending it a whole bunch of stuff, random stuff, while pointing a video camera at it and just seeing what happened. And eventually I hit on the right sequences and then suddenly it was displaying text and there we go. But it is part of the fun for me to kind of take apart things that, you know, may have worked or at one point maybe don't work so well anymore and just kind of like gleaning little bits of it and then just kind of pulling out those like super worn, interesting materials and kind of showcasing them, giving them their own little spot in the spotlight. So this particular one, the reverse engineering was like a big part of it. I use my own software. It's really important to me to have like a lot of control over how things function and make them like good experiences. I personally, and this is no judgment on other artists, well, maybe it is. I personally am so annoyed when like electronic artwork doesn't work, or like when you have to like, you know, do a 15-step process to like get it going each morning. Like, I don't want any of that. I want plug and play. So for me, in order to achieve that, I had to go deep and like learn how to write code and like figure out how to program these things. So there are individual computers in most of my artworks. Like there's a full computer that's running like an operating system and it's running my software, which I have control over every aspect over. And that took a heck of a lot of work to get to this point of actually being able to like easily create and show artworks, but it's paying dividends now because I can just, you know, have my own software that really behaves reliably each time. And it's running on a computer called a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi is like a really fun thing. I don't know if y'all had heard that phrase before, but it's intended for children. A Raspberry Pi is like an educational computer. It's about the size of like a credit card, like yay big. They're like 20, 30 bucks. So I, as an artist, if I mess up the computer, oh, well, I can buy another one. It's not like the end of the world. So they're really fun for like art stuff because you can play with them. They also are it's relatively easy to hook them up to physical things that like blink or like buttons and just making things that are interactive or change by themselves. So if anyone's interested in this stuff, Raspberry Pi is the way you should look up. So I made this at Hole in the Sky, which RIP. This was a fantastic place in Northeast DC that was initially named after having the hole in the ceiling. But they hosted me for a fellowship in March of 2020. So I made it about 2 weeks into that. But I made this there. And so this kind of captures my like early, like, oh, wait, the mayor is closing the city? What? It's all in there. But that's that piece. It's pretty straightforward. The messages change every 30 seconds or so. The next one is fake plastic trees. And yes, that is a Radiohead reference. I apologize. It's that artwork sitting there on a pedestal. It looks like this. It's showing some really weird video. And I'm just going to show you a bit of it on the big screen here to kind of give you a sense of it. This artwork is imagining a world where we have run out of natural views. Like there are no windows anymore. You can't look out the window and see trees. You have to buy a window and see like algorithmically generated trees. And I'm sort of imagining like what that would be like. And so this is really strange. Like the quality of it, it sort of seethes and bubbles. And if you watch it for a while, you'll see some kind of details appear and then just vanish. And it's strange. I don't like it. I don't like looking at it. I made it. I'm sharing it with you. You should all look at it. This smells bad. I think it's a really strange image quality. And let me show you how I got it. I filmed some trees that were like waving and like kind of moving around very dramatically. And then I downscaled the heck out of it, which is to say I like made it like a really low res image. And when I say really low res, I took a 1920 by 1080, more than 2000 pixels wide, or almost 2000 pixels wide, and downscaled it to 30 pixels wide by 18. Like just about as small as you can really go and kind of have anything. So that's what that looks like. You know, it's not that easy to make out much detail in it, right? A lot of cameras these days and a lot of TVs have a technology built into them called an upscaler. where if you give it some crummy image, if it's a TV, or if you're trying to take a picture of something that the sensor can't really quite make out, it does its best to fake it. So I ran one of those on my computer, an upscaler. It's real ESR, it's a GAN. So I ran it 64 times to get back up to the same size. So here's what that looks like with essentially like these two frames are basically before and after. So on the left is the natural video, pretty nice tree, cool, fine, whatever. On the right, you'll notice there are some kind of interesting qualities to the image. It's like, it's doing its best, like it really is. I don't fault this algorithm per se, but using this upscaler has just added all this strange detail to it. So like, look up there, what is that? Are those like telephone poles or like buildings? What? That's weird. And then like down there, again, is that structures? I feel like this is like some, and each frame is like this. They're each different. They're just individual weird little worlds that are not really that connected with each other. It's interesting. It's strange. It's almost as much fun to like stop it and just look at one still, but I thought it'd be fun to just like 5 minutes of video, let's go. So that's what's in the artwork. But I think it's interesting to think about the implications of this technology, which by the way, most phones do now. Like most phones have AI powered upscalers in them. If you buy a new phone, it has this. So if you go like telephoto 10X or something, and it doesn't actually have like the image detail there, it'll fake it. But what does that mean? Like, I'm interested in like the possible implications of technologies like this. Like if you have like a super upscaled photo entered as evidence in a trial, like what if it sees some detail in the background and imagines it to be having been trained on too many like cop movies or something? What if it sees a gun on the ground and it renders that and saves it as a JPEG? Like we're not ready for that. And that is happening right now. Like our legal system and our minds are not prepared for the reality of having AI upscalers around us all the time. So these are built into most phones now. And so I want to just rant about AI for about a minute. I'm going to get it out of my system and we are not going to talk about AI again after that. So what is the function of generative AI right now in the world? What are the actual things that it does? It worsens income inequality. It makes rich people richer. It destroys low-income jobs and maybe some middle-income jobs too. Income inequality. Further, it generates a ton of disinformation and meaningless spam. Like we still have not figured out quite how that affected the election that we just held. But it certainly did. I mean, Arab American voters in Michigan got all these crazy texts about how, you know, Democrats were super for Israel, which it's complicated, right? I'm not going there, but these texts reflected a reality that was untrue and they were generated at scale and reached like 1 million voters. That's kind of wild. That's something you can do with like 10 hours of dev time now. The training data that is used in generative AI systems was basically stolen, like the vast majority of startups using generative AI right now, just like stole huge swaths of it from the internet. And if you use that, I feel that you are morally complicit in that theft. So that's my judgment. Apologies. I also think that it's just being hyped so much. Like it's being called intelligence. It's not smart. It's not reasoning. It's not capable of it. If you ask it to solve a puzzle, like, you know, the one where there's like 3 doors and there's a treasure hidden behind one door. If you modify that and say, the host is telling you that the treasure is behind the middle door. Do you open the middle door? It replies with like, no, actually, counterintuitively, you should open the door to the left because it's seen that pattern of responses so many times. It doesn't really know what it's talking about. And I mean that sincerely. It doesn't reason. It doesn't think. It doesn't take these issues apart. It just spews text. And so this technology being so hyped, the interesting thing about things that are hyped is the best way to kill them, which is to just not pay them any more attention. So I tonight am declaring this, from this point forward, a Gen AI free zone. I'm not going to talk about AI. You can ask me questions. I'll say next question, I promise. So going back to the artwork for a second, what do I do with all this cynicism? I'm like, oh my God, like these technologies are ruining the world right around me right now. I thought it might be kind of fun to just like pivot that into like a prediction, just like a clearly playful, not really realistic, sort of maybe a little bit haha about how we're going to end up with this world where they're not going to be windows anymore. Like we're going to have windows, there's going to be trees. I'm not too worried about those things, but it's fun to imagine like what it would be like to have to sell natural views that you've created algorithmically. So I made a fake company, as I want to do in my artworks. So this is the Naturetronics Corporation selling this product to you. It's based in Rochester, New York, like many fine optical startups. I don't know, a little company named Kodak maybe started that trend. And it has a fun little logo here. I really wanted to have like some sort of aesthetic like this. My sketchbook is full of random photos like this, where I like see a utility box and I'm like, oh, I want that. So I took a picture of this because I wanted this. And so it's like an embossed, texture with like a simple line art kind of logo. So I turned to the Grammar of Ornament. Do you all know this book? It's wild. It's like 150 years old and full of problems, I'm sure. But it's intended to be like cross-cultural slice of all of the different forms of ornamentation that have existed in cultures around the world. And so you can just flip through this thing and they're like beautiful full color reproductions. So I settled on this flower here. I think it's like a camellia, but someone in the room probably knows and I don't. But I redrew it in Illustrator like this, just kind of traced it out and like added my little logo and picked out a good font because you have to have a good font. So I picked out all that stuff and then laid it out in Illustrator like this. And then I made this with it. So I have a CNC router, which is like a heck of a privilege. This machine at the top right, it's like a drill bit on a robotic carriage, or like a Dremel. It's like a fancy Dremel that can move itself. So it's not that powerful, it's slow, it makes a tremendous noise, sorry neighbors. But I use it to make simple little artworks like this, where it's just kind of like cutting out a pattern for me after I laid it out in Illustrator. So this CNC router actually came to me from a makerspace in Silver Spring called Catallator, RIP. The operator of that makerspace sold this machine to me and a friend for a song, which, thank you, Steve. So I cut it out of this material. There's a bunch of different brands. Don't worry too much about this brand that I have pictured here, but aluminum composite. So it's a thin, like sandwich of aluminum, a big fat slice of soft plastic, and then another thin slice of aluminum. And if you look for this, you will see it in lobbies and like coffee shops, and like it's used in architectural contexts. What that means for me as an artist is it is cheap. So you can buy like a meter by a meter of this stuff for like 20 bucks. I did not buy that much of it. I bought a little bit of it and then milled it. And the nice thing about it, having that central core of black plastic, is as soon as you get through the metal, the black shows through, and that's just automatic inking, if you will. Like just cutting through the metal there produced this result. I used a little fine little bit. It took forever, but that's, relatively straightforward way to make like a fun looking machine aesthetic. And it came brushed already. Like, you get a wire brush, you just scratch some aluminum, no big deal. But if it's done for you, even better. So I then fit it into this wooden closure, which like, this is the thing that you buy if you're like an electronics person. You buy an enclosure, and an enclosure is a fancy box that is specifically designed to be a good experience for you, a rando, to insert your own electronics into. It's great. It has like little holes in it for you to like run the wires through. They'll have like places for you to mount all the little bits and bobs. So I took this one and added some bits and bobs and added a screen and a Raspberry Pi and a little bit of software, but not too much. It's actually free software called the Video Looper, which artists may enjoy learning about because you can use it very easily to have a self-looping video screen that you just plug in. So it's running that, and it's just showing a rendered video of that crazy AI stuff. Oops, I didn't say AI. That crazy upscaled stuff. Put it together, waxed it, boom. And then the third one in the show, CONFAB. This is insert 25 cents to feel something. Anyone here tried it? Did you feel something? What was it? Joy? Good. Joy? Okay, good. I was wondering if anyone felt ripped off. That's true. That's true. I did sponsor. So if you need one, ask at the front desk. I am going to just play this video real quick for the live stream, just so everyone kind of knows what happens. You put a quarter in. It plays a silly song, 1 of 3, and it shows you a cat. The video here, I'm doing a little Hollywood. It's showing multiple cats, but you only get 1 for your quarter. I was really inspired by a couple of different board weight machines, and I'll talk about one of them in detail in a moment, but I was inspired very much by the experience of like putting a quarter in and seeing like a flip book. Like there were machines from the, 1920s, 30s, where you would see like a paper flip book animate on demand when you put a coin in. So cool, and it was like a bulbous lens, and I just wanted to recreate that experience. And so, whoops, no, not again. No. Again, whether you want it or not. Again. It started with this oily steel box. So I buy a lot of big, messy steel boxes from industrial equipment dealers, as one does. They tend to have been used in factories, like really. So this particular box that I've circled was one of this haul. I've made artworks out of almost all of these so far. But this particular one was used on some press or something that was really oily. It needed a lot of oil. And of course, this box was filled with oil too. And this is after I've scrubbed it twice. This is 2 into the 5 scrubbings. You can see the black oil in there. It's like, oh, so gross. And so like, you know, again with the aesthetic here, it's like grimy. Notice how grimy it is, dirty. And then in a moment, you'll see it's pretty clean looking. I just use dish soap like Dawn, like, you know, oil spilled ducks. A thing I actually saw in person. Here it is like one step in. So I had previously been playing around with this idea of vending machines and arcade machines. I think it's fun. It's just kind of joyous to like have this unattended thing respond to you and like do something when you just give it a little bit of money. So I think that's fun, you know, it's like, it can be a great experience. Of course, you know, when you lose your quarter or whatever, less fun. But I had tried to make a vend-a-joke machine where you would put money in and get a joke out. This was much earlier in my electronics career. I started learning electronics as a hobby about 11 years ago. And so this was like maybe a year or two in. I wasn't that good at it yet. So I, you know, took that vending machine apart and I still had the coin acceptor. That's it down there. It's this funny looking thing, you know, but it has like signals that it sends after you put a quarter in. And so I had to cut a hole in the front of this steel box, and it's steel. So I had to use an angle grinder, and I was outside, and facial protection, all that good stuff. Angle grinders, maybe some of you are nodding knowingly, but I got the hole, and then I put the thing in it. The next one was that I had gotten this bulbous lens. Like I just loved this lens. It was intended to be put on the front of a flashlight, I think. The distributor that I bought it from sold a lot of parts for making lights. So I bought a lens really without knowing what I would do with it. It sat around in my studio for 6 months, as many things do. And then it became the front of this machine. But one kind of like challenging aspect of that is how you actually get a round hole of that size in steel that's maybe 4 millimeters thick. So I bought one of these. It was a lot. Using this hole saw, I do not recommend it unless you are very sure that you know what you're doing. I almost knew what I was doing. It worked. I got a hole. But this thing is just like so much steel spinning very quickly. It wouldn't fit on my press, so I had to hand hold it. Not recommended. It worked. So I got a hole. And then I want to just call out fasteners really quickly. I think I maybe circled them. Yeah. So I really like screws and nuts and bolts and all that. Not because like each of them is intrinsically interesting, because I think they're part of like an artistic expression. It's like, you know, we don't all paint with like one brush. Like you use like different fasteners for different things, and they have different meanings to those who know, but also just different looks. So this particular thing, I really decided that since it was such a round lens, I needed kind of similarly round, like obtuse fasteners around it. Also just kind of channeling like what you would put on a real vending machine so that someone wouldn't take it apart and get all the quarters out. So I got these like lovely acorn dome nuts to finish off the lens. Threw 4 of those on. You'll notice these are not that great. These are fine. These are temporary fasteners while the real ones were coming in the mail. It's fine. They're like Phillips head screws. You wouldn't have a Phillips head screw on a vending machine because you could just take it off. No, you got to have like weird screws. So you'll notice in a moment that those are replaced. It's also like, really, this is like the cleanest that the machine ever got. Like I scrubbed off all that grime that we saw initially, all the oil, scrubbed off all that grime, and then I put it back. So we'll talk about that. This is the source of the lettering. This is a classic Bordeaux machine. This particular one is from the Pinball Museum in Las Vegas. But I swear I've seen one in Ocean City, MD some years ago. It's no longer there. I went looking. But it's called the Relaxolator. The Relaxolator is a machine where you step on it and you put a bit of money in and it jiggles your feet a lot, really fast. That's the machine. And it had all this like amazing lettering on it. I just loved it. It felt hand lettered. I don't know if it actually was. But I just like the aesthetic of it. So I kind of borrowed the aesthetic, but also the words because, you know, sure, add a little bit of surreality. Why not? Tired, no pep, feet hurt, step up for a pickup, a tonic, a real treat. So I just lifted that and laid it out in Illustrator. I must admit, there was a plan the whole time. I was presenting this as a narrative of me doing these things, but I did the plan first. That's how my brain works sometimes. So I laid it all out in Illustrator. This is the clean artwork. Like this is what it would look like if I faithfully rendered it 100%. But go ahead.
What font is that?
Ooh, I don't know offhand. I want to say it's Helmet condensed, but I'm like 90% on that.
Helmet?
Helmet is a knockoff of Helvetica, which has like a more brutal quality in the font sense, but yeah, it's nice. I'm not 100% on that, but I can tell you after I check the files. But yeah, there's an art to finding like machine fonts. And there's a whole family of fonts that were functionally like single line fonts that were used on CNC machines that are like very hard to faithfully render these days without doing some silly stuff. So I did have a plan all along. This was the clean version of the art. And then I made it happen. So I started out by laser cutting a stencil. I have access to a laser cutter, which is amazing. I don't own it, but I can use it. Fabulous. Great machine. It's designed to cut certain materials, plastics, thin woods, really not a lot else, and not all plastics either. But it's designed to cut them pretty cleanly. So I used it to cut out the lettering as a stencil here, and then overpainted the heck out of it. Like that, this is clearly like way more over the edges than I needed, right? Or is it? Because when you let the acrylic cure, then when you take the whole stencil up, it brings about half of it with it, which is a problem in some domains. But when you're trying to make a machine that looks like it's been on the Ocean City Boardwalk for 40 years, perfect. It degrades it for me. So I got this sort of pre-degraded one right off the, right out the bat with this initial pass here. So this is the first pass where I took off most of the lettering that I had just hand painted on. And, some of it doesn't really work. Like you can't really read a lot of it, honestly. There are other parts that feel too clean. Like, I like this, but I wanted it to be a little bit less clean. And there are other parts here where there's like too much paint applied and like it needed some work. So this was the first pass. Oh, and let me also just say, how freaking shiny and gross is that? Yuck, that looks like plastic. It is, ew, yuck. This is metal, but it's just like too clean. There's no way this thing's been outside. So here's what I did to it. I'll toggle back and forth. So before and after, before and after. Some of the main things that I did here are painted again, just kind of hand lettering in to get more of that kind of like sign painterly like brush stroke, just kind of filling in the holes on some of the words, just enough that you could probably read it. I like that. I like probably good enough. That's a good level of legibility in my world. And then I added a lot of mess. So to kind of dull the finish of all the shiny bits, I hit them with some polyurethane, spray paint, like it's clear. I used matte clear polyurethane, not my favorite substance. It's really nice for this. And then I added a lot of waxes. So from the chalk paint furniture Instagram Pinterest world, there are a ton of great waxes you can buy. You can buy this like white wax that is just like the starkest white substance you can imagine. It's as good as paint. It goes on real thick, and then you take almost all of it back off and you're left with the milky haze. So I started with that again, like kind of filling in the grooves on the coin acceptor and this like metal part here, just like kind of giving it more of that kind of weathered feel. After the polyurethane had mostly cured, I went back at it with a knife to kind of scrape some of it off. So you get that feel like it's, gotten crusty from sand and salt and air. I added a bunch of black and brown waxes and then took almost all of them back off. And I have like, because I do this enough, I have a set of kind of like pre-fouled brushes and cloths that are like ready to go. Where if I just need a little grime, I just grab my dirty cloth and I put the dirty cloth on it. That sounds really unhinged, but it's true. I do. I keep brown and black around. Those are great for just adding like a base level of crust. And then I wanted the coin acceptor to feel like it had specifically like patinaed a bit, patinated. So I have a like mint green paint. Believe it or not, I slathered that with mint green paint and then took almost all of it back off. And that just leaves a little bit in the kind of little recesses. That gives it a little bit of a feel, like particularly in the middle there. What else? I sanded it some to kind of pull back more of the texture where I didn't like it on the lettering and kind of pull back some edges a bit. And really just kind of reintroduce most of the grime that I'd taken back off. You might be like, wait, why did you bother? The first reason is I wanted the lettering to actually stick. If you just paint over oil, it doesn't work so well. That's one problem. Another thing is that these are actually coming from factories. I have no idea what they were manufacturing. Could be ugly. So I try to clean off all of the like grime and grodiness and soot and oil and all that stuff just to start from like a base position. I also tend to apply a fixative as the last stage just to make sure that if there's anything left on there, it's going to stay on there. And then you'll notice these are the final fasteners. I went with hex head bolts, which is not totally realistic for an arcade machine. Wouldn't be that hard to get them off. But they had a really chunky aesthetic, which I liked. And so I went with that. The actual imagery in it, I used a silly free version of Final Cut Pro, essentially, called Kden Live. Don't worry about it. I used that to make them feel like those flipbooks again. Just be like jogging and kind of moving around. And the actual photos are public domain cats from Flickr. I was asked by many people to include their own cats. I did not go down that road. You can imagine it might be a minefield. Sorry, your cat wasn't cute enough. I know better. So I made like 9 of these kind of, technically they're videos, they're MP4s that are just like showing the sort of film crustiness. They're like, in the same way that a projector would show an image. And then just kind of like having it like fall off the screen at the end and like pop back up on the screen. That was like I remember that aesthetic from seeing the doors open on these old school machines. Like there'd be like a door that opened. So I wanted to replicate that. The sound, I'm not citing this. I'm just showing you what one of them looked like. Because these source songs, they're all like pre-copyright things that I dug up in the Library of Congress archives. And they're like funny and also sexist and racist. Like they're terrible. These like vaudeville comic songs are very difficult to find short clips from that are passable in today's context. So I really don't want to cite them and say, hey, go listen to this. Don't do that. They're bad. But I found some cute sections of them that involve people meowing. And I thought that kind of fit the old-timey vibe. Ideally, I would hire an old-timey band. So if any of you are in one of those, I guess let me know. And the electronics, I really don't want to talk too much about electronics tonight. These are some parts that are included. There's a coin acceptor, it's just like a regular LCD, like a little tiny screen behind that bulbous lens. I just stuck it together. I made like a little 3D printed thing to hold them together. Fine, no big deal. You could use tape, it doesn't matter. And then some like audio stuff. And then one key feature, just like thinking about like what it's like to have other people showing your art. Like if this was in my studio, I could have like the most ridiculous procedure to empty it out or turn it on or any of that stuff. But this thing, I wanted to be out in the world. It's already shown, it was at UMD and now it's here. And like, to me, it's important that it be a good experience for the people showing the art too. So my mechanism for emptying out the coin bucket is that you can just take it off the wall and pour it. I also figured if someone like really wanted those quarters themselves, hopefully they'd figure that out without damaging it. I don't know, no judgment. But yeah, you literally just pour out the quarters. It's got like a spout hidden on the side. And it also crucially has a volume control. If you make art that emits noise, you gotta have one of those. You really do, no joke. I wanted to talk a little bit too about why the heck I made this. Like, why did you make a machine that's about feeling things? I was just thinking about getting all in my own head about how like, online, all these free platforms, you are paying something. And what you're paying is your time and attention and your eyeballs and the value that you might represent to someone trying to sell you something. And so the platforms that receive these payments of your attention then go on and sell them to advertisers and all that good stuff. I was interested in that dynamic. And so I kind of wanted to explore like what it's like to pay attention, but literally paying a quarter. And if it's your quarter especially, you will feel that when you're putting it in. You're like, am I really gonna, it's only a quarter, but you're still gonna feel it. And I wanted that dynamic of like feeling something as you did it. And what is like a classic like engaging thing that you see on Facebook or whatever? Cat picture. So just giving you like a cheesy thing that kind of speaks to engagement online was my goal. Those are the 3 artworks in this show. Now I'll go to the bio part. My background's, you heard a little bit of it already. I studied photojournalism at the Corcoran and shot for a while, photographed for a while, I should say. I became a photo editor, got into product management for media companies, worked in media for 12 years total. A bunch of it was at Nat Geo, which was fun. I recommend that to anyone for about 1 year. I did about 8, so it was too much. It's a lot of very passionate people who are so passionate that they don't necessarily want to work together. I started learning electronics as an adult. I wanted, when I was a kid, to make robots, but I wasn't that like focused, or maybe the learning materials weren't as good. I don't know, some combination of those is true. So I just started learning it again using children's materials now, because there are all these nonprofits teaching kids how to do it. Arduino, Raspberry Pi. They make fabulous gear that's cheap, and they show you how to use it in all kinds of formats. You can read it, you can watch a video. Some of it's intended for children, some of it's intended for artists, like DIY, maker stuff. So I just started learning from that as like a hobby. I like ran around the house doing silly stuff. You open the liquor cabinet, the light turns on. Cool. I had like a screen by the door that would tell me when the next bus was coming, so that hopefully I wouldn't like walk or like take the train. Like some useful stuff, some silly. And then at some point I was like, oh yeah, I got into this like media track in my professional world, but I did get an art degree. Like maybe I should just make some art. So I made a piece of art and I threw it on the wall at the D.C. Arts Center, Wall Mountables, in 2017. It was like my first piece of electronic art. Sold it that night. The person who bought it, Philip Barlow, was like, oh, by the way, do you want to do a show of your work? And I was like, what? My work? Yes, by all means. He took me more seriously than I did. And I really have Philip and Lisa to thank for like sort of making me take myself seriously and see that there was something there. Thank you to them. And had some other shows since, here and there. I've been full-time since January 2020. My joke is that I got used to being at home and broke just before everyone else. About a year later, an opening at Otis Street Arts Project, which has been like such a gift. It's a fabulous community. There's 14 or 15 artists. We're in Mount Rainier, Maryland, which is literally just over the line. Like it's barely in Maryland. I get to double dip on grants. But it's a fabulous community. One of the things that I like about it, there are many things, but it's curated by its kind of operator, David Mordini, as like being kind of like his days at the Corcoran, where there's like no doors on the studios, and the people who are there, he has to like make sure that you're not going to annoy the other artists when you start out. But we all like work out a dynamic where we'll be like, hey, how you doing? 2 minutes, bye. But it's also an in-house resource all the time, because you can be like, hey, I think this sucks. Did I screw it up? And they'll be like, yes. Or they'll be like, no, it's great. Do this. It's just like such a fabulous resource for getting advice about your creative blockages. Everyone, I would say like most people work with kind of maybe similar materials in some ways, but very different ways of approaching it. So like we have someone who like uses waste materials from 3D prints to like make these beautiful cellular life forms. Liz, let's go. And like, that's such a different way of thinking about this material than me. I love that. It's great. So I love being there. And another fun thing about it is we don't have trash removal. So whenever I have like excess something, or I take like a big bubble wrap thing off something, I'll be like, hey, can you make something out of this? And half the time people will say, yes, it's great. Gloria, you know what I'm talking about. And now I just make art full time. It's great. And people ask me like, yes, you can buy them. They go in your house. I include a warranty because lightning happens. I want to talk a little bit about kind of process stuff, not too much like, how do you lay out a circuit board? Again, the internet exists. Go learn there if you want that. But I want to just talk about like creative process stuff. Like how do you like actually take all these different materials and skills and start making artwork out of it? I also want to talk about what it's like to like do interdisciplinary collabs. This might sound egotistical, but when I start talking to other artists about the kind of art that I make, so often there's like a light bulb that goes off and people get really excited. And then it goes off the rails. So I want to talk about how that happens and what not to do. And I also just want to talk about some nice communities for like cross-pollinating between like art and STEM. I know it's STEAM, but like how do you actually find people working in other disciplines, and how do you connect with them, and like where do you go? So I have a crazy diagram for you all. I hope you're excited. I'll talk about process real quick here. So I personally just dabble in a lot of different techniques. Like these are some of the things that I've made. These circuit boards here, I made these. So I designed them, I sent them off in Nerd Illustrator to a circuit board factory that made the blanks for me, but then I soldered everything on here using tweezers. That's a penny, that's a millimeter. They go on here, it's a whole process. I make them. So a lot of my artworks include my own circuit boards because it just lets me pour functions into any form that I want. I can be like, oh, I want to have one that's shaped like a stick. Cool, can do. That's fun. Took a while to get there, but it's fun. You can learn it off the internet. I encourage you to do so if you're interested. I also like, I'm interested in interaction design and like UI and UX and like laser cutting, 3D printing, CNC, all this stuff, a lot of different things out there. Each morning I could pick any one of these things and like do it. And I'm not saying I'm an expert in any of them, but I just dabble in a lot of different things. And I'm also interested in all these topics. So like surveillance, control, environmental devastation, like, point of sale, algorithmic bias, like how AI systems incorporate flaws from the start. Didn't mean to talk about AI again, sorry. A lot of different themes out there, a lot of different ways of making things. How do I actually decide? So this is one artwork I did recently-ish. You've maybe seen it around town, maybe not. It's like a flower-shaped piece. It's kind of floor standing. It's big. It is beguiling and glowing and cyber and cool from a distance, and then you get up to it and it's creepy as hell. What it's doing is looking for your face, and it turns your face into crazy flowers. And it also listens to the words that you say. Oh my God, I'm on the artwork, and shows a transcript of your speech. So it's like beguiling from a distance and then creepy as hell up close, which I think a lot of technologies maybe are like that. How did I arrive at that? In my head, I think it's easier for me if I don't try to come up with a complete artwork from the get-go. Instead, I just deal with these three areas completely separately. I deal with forms, things that look a certain way or incorporate certain materials. I deal with functions, like things that act a certain way, things that glow or like, scream when you press a button. And then themes, like ad tech, or like how data is like pollen. It's just invisibly emitted by us in all directions when we engage with the world. Pretty good, right? I combined all these things here, and that's how I made pollination. It's like the form of an amaryllis, but taken down to 4 petals because it's hard to do other than 45-degree angles with aluminum extrusion. That's my crappy CAD, like first version of the flower. It didn't really end up looking like that because I did it wrong. That's another different flower artwork I was playing with. It does these functions, like all these computers in there do the things. But for me, it's helpful to split them all out. So like, I will just make a bunch of things that look a certain way or incorporate these materials without having any idea why. Like, I'll just make a thing, and later I'll pour a function into it, or I'll give it this meaning. And you don't have to do it all at the same time. If you have enough storage space, which big problem, you can make them separately. And then I like to just add them all together on a big R&D day in my studio. I'll just be like, hey, what if this cute fake rosewood box goes well with this screen, which goes well with my malaise about upscalers? And then all those things just kind of, the pairings can be very type B. Like, you don't have to be like engineering from the start. You don't have to be like, I'm going to do the thing. What is exactly the thing? I know already. You don't have to. You can just deal with each thing separately and then kind of assign their purposes later. And for me, that was like a big moment when I realized that in my own artistic practice. Because often when you're learning how to do something, you think, I need a project. What is the project? You don't. You can just learn how the thing works and then figure out the project later. So let's talk about collaboration. You've just met someone with a skill that's very exciting to you, but then what? For me, when I hear someone say almost immediately after meeting them and describing what I do, they'll be like, I want to collaborate with you. I'm like, oh no. That's not to say I don't collaborate with people. I collaborate with people all the time, and it can be very fruitful and interesting and useful. But I think the main problem that artists fall into, the main trap that artists fall into, is that when you hear about someone who knows a skill, it's almost like you see it as like a tool that you can employ for your art. It's like the person becomes a paintbrush, but they're a person. Like, no matter how rote you might think engineering is, it's not. It's highly creative. Coding, super creative disciplines. All these things are ultimately people who want to be creatively fulfilled and learn something or get something and enjoy it. And these are meaningful things. And if you start off by imagining how useful someone can be to you, they can tell it doesn't go well. So what are the reasons someone might want to work with you? Is it a learning opportunity? Yeah, maybe. Maybe you'll find a student or someone who's really interested in learning how to use facial recognition. And this might be the perfect moment for them. More than likely not. Honestly, if you're working with someone because they're going to be able to learn something out of it, you're probably not going to get great results, either of you. Because the first project you do when you're learning something, maybe it works. And having real control of something, not your first time project with something. Exposure, no. I think we all know that road. And if you are interested in just hiring someone to do the work, that's a thing you can do. Go do it. That's great. Get a fabricator, someone who will build something to your specs. That's totally a thing. If you need to save up and do that, totally understand. I've hired fabricators. It works great. But if you want a real collaborator, it's got to be someone who's going to have creative input, and it'll be a conversation. How the hell do you do that? So what I like to say is you've got to take all your fully formed ideas. You might have like a great fully formed idea in your head and just like throw it out. My boo and I, we have this thing we call throwing it in the Seine. After a legendary argument, we wrote it down on a piece of paper and threw it in the Seine. I'm not going to talk further about that act of pollution from many years ago, but it's a useful metaphor of like, just write it down, get it out of your system, get that idea out of your head. If you're trying to collaborate with someone, just get rid of your fully formed thing. You got to be like sketchy and loose. I saw a call for artists yesterday for the Hieronymus Bosch parade, which exists and is amazing. It's in the Netherlands. It's an aquatic parade of things inspired by Hieronymus Bosch's work, which the Garden of Earthly Delights, you can make floats. It's amazing. I really want to do this. Their call says, do you have a fully formed idea? We're going to say no to you because we want something loose that we can work with and help you shape. And that rung so true to me. Like that is 100% what you want from a collaborator. So throw it in the Seine, start over. And you just don't know what you don't know. Like materials and functions dictate things form. And you can tell when someone's really tried to force something through and the material's fighting it. Like a classic example of this is that it's really fun to sculpt shapes abstractly in software. Like you can make like a really cool looking shape. And then you bring it to your friend who has a 3D printer and you're like, 3D print this. And they might be like, okay, yeah, that'll be great. And I might be like, hell no, that's not going to print. And you're like, wait, why? Oh, because it is actually like a physical thing. The plastic has to start at the bottom and stick to something and cool. And then you have to build up from there. There's gravity. You cannot just start the thing in the middle of the air. Nearly every 3D sculpt has stuff in the middle of the damn air. So if you like start the printer there, it just piddles a little bit of plastic out the end and then it moves around with it. Like there's the physicality to it that you wouldn't know until you know. And that's true of pretty much every physical discipline. Like you just have to be open to your fundamental idea and design being wrong. So it's tough. I know what that feels like. But like being ready to just throw away your initial ideas is so important when you do find a creative partner. Other kind of like group assignment dynamics, we've all been there. You got to make sure you understand the other person's work ethic and their attentiveness to detail. You don't have to be on the same page about these things. And also like what happens in their life, like what is going on for them in the real world, because understandably, there are very few real art emergencies. Like the real world happens, people got like stuff to deal with. If you know about what could happen to somebody before you start a project with them with a short deadline, that's really important and useful to know. Just talk about these things, figure it out. You don't have to be on the same page. You just have to know kind of what you're getting and who's going to do what when the rubber really hits the road. I think it's also helpful to kind of just like screen for humanness, like talk to someone and see what they're like to talk to. And do they ask you questions? I have this personal pet peeve. I watch when someone I've just met, how long it takes them to try to give advice. If the answer is never, it's great. I love it. Besties, 100%. But if someone gives me advice right off the bat, I'm like, nice to meet you. We know these people, and it's well-meaning. Like it's not inherently like, I don't know if I'd even say it's a character flaw exactly. It's just not something I want in my life. Because I don't necessarily think it's helpful to be telling someone what to do when you've just met them. So you look for that in a collaborator too. And whether they're ready to let go of their stuff and throw it in the Seine, that's important. And just like, taking time to slow down and listen and respond to someone's ideas and take them seriously. Because they are serious and you are serious and you want to collaborate together on something really cool. I hope I didn't make it sound hard. You can do it. I've done it. It's great. The diagram. All right. Maybe you're wondering, like, where the heck do I meet someone who knows how to use a CNC router or I don't know, how to paint or like do a sculpture or like how to, I don't know, pour concrete. These are this is my very idiosyncratic view of the many places locally at the top, like the wider world at the bottom, and then left to right. I know these are not, strictly speaking, a continuum. I know. I did my best. Artsy on the left, engineering on the right. I don't think techie is a good word, engineering. Like, if you want, it could be like type B, type A. I don't know. But just kind of like these are different vibes, and these are different places, and some of them are just places that throw events, and you should go to their events and meet people. Other ones are communities, like Discords that you can join. I really like Creative Club DC. That's a good one. It's just like a weekly gathering where you just go like draw together in a bar or at the MLK library or whatever. It's fabulous. That's a really nice one. A lot of these other communities, I'll just go through them real quick. Rhizome DC, DIY space that's perpetually on the chopping block from their past home, but they have a new home on Georgia Avenue, or ish, right? Close to Georgia Avenue, South Silver Spring. Fabulous like place to meet people who are super into audio stuff, like people who are electronics, like hackers maybe hanging out there. I went to an amazing live coding workshop there, which is a thing where you do VJing, but live by typing away on a screen while people watch you code. And that is a nightmare to me, but I loved watching it. That's a fabulous community. Rhizome DC has like a bunch of different pools that all kind of gather there. The DC MLK makerspace, again, not to brag, but my boo and I were like, we were the first two heads to like send in our heads to get 3D printed when they got 3D printers, like all over it. I love them. They have like a lot of interesting gear, and they're interesting people too. And if you need advice on how to proceed with the project, go to the makerspace during some of their open hours and just ask them. Lord, they're sitting around all day. Love them. Similarly, the Arlington Libraries Lab on Quincy, similar vibe, smaller operation, they're great. They host workshops. They did me once. The Make Fix Anything project is a periodic gathering that's just a DIY effort by one dude who's an amazing woodworker, Matt McEntee, and he just helps you fix your stuff that broke. So you're like, oh man, I really loved this toaster, scooter, and I'll be like, all right, I don't really know how to do that, but we will figure it out. It's great, great vibes, a lot of fun. Hack DC, this is like a classic old institution in the punk rock church, St. Stephen's. They have like some gear, they have a lot of know-how, they have a huge community. It's a small space, but their Discord is enormous. Great, I love them. The DC DataViz meetup is a fabulous place to go if you're interested in data visualization in particular. I know that there's a lot of like kind of issues, artwork that really could use better graphs. The Lichen Labs Discord, I just learned about this one a few hours ago, but it's just like a fun community of people who are interested in making their own indie games. So text adventurers and other kind of like, it's a fun community, I can already tell. Sound Scene, the DC Listening Lounge. This is a bunch of radio heads, not the band, people who work in radio and think about the sound as they go around their daily lives. I have some friends who work in radio, and one of them was bragging to me about his recordings of those escalator whales on Metro. The Listening Lounge is a monthly gathering where audio people just get together and play each other recordings of the weird stuff, of their interviews, of their like tone poems. It's great. And they throw an annual event. It's usually at the Hirshhorn. It's called Sound Scene. The call is open right now if you want to do one. It's a great thing for a collaboration. Sound Scene is a fabulous sound-related festival that's 2 days or 1 day, depending on the year. Recommend it highly. The Innovation Studio at Mocha Arlington. This is a newer venue. It's on HQ2, the Amazon campus. I had a residency there, so they're like a nice place to go use art supplies on a daily basis. They're just open. You can just go draw, paint on your lunch break if you want, as long as you're in Arlington. But they also have periodic workshops and one resident artist at a time who's doing something interesting. I think they might be between them right now, but don't quote me on that or record me or put me on the internet. DMV Petri Dish. This is a sort of intentionally cross-pollination community. I have it on the end here because I started running out of space. It should be in the middle, sorry. But it's like artists and engineers and science and like a lot of science. It's cool. Great place to meet people who are like biologists. The RSC Makerspace, that's in Rockville Science Center. I hear that's a great place to go. Like if you're in that area and you want to, similarly to like the Makerspace at MLK, if you just need help figuring something out physically, they'll help you with it. The DC Motherboard Instagram is a new community that's just started up around like electronics artwork, kind of like mine. Crash Space and iBeam and NYC Resistor are three fabulous organizations in other cities. So New York City for the last two, Crash Spaces in LA-ish. But they all have online communities. You can join those online communities, and if you have like an obscure question, they might have an answer. Like this, it's if you can't find it in 1,000 people in Hack DC, try Crash Space. They got another 1,000, and they're all different, and they're all full of interesting creatives. The UMD IMD is like a program that you can enroll in, but they have events that are often, if not officially open to the public, I hear you can just mooch. Geek Mom Projects. Deborah is this personality. She's great. She's, I want to say like, I don't know her age, it doesn't really matter, but she's like an older artist who's getting into electronics these last like 5 or 10 years, kind of like me, and just makes fabulous, joyous, glowing things and tells you how to do it. And they'll be like just glittered, just like loaded with LEDs. And her whole deal is she will tell you how to make this like, you know, expanding, contracting like LED monster that's like a blob with googly eyes. It's great. She's joyous, and her materials are all extremely straightforward and easy to follow. Similarly, the Adafruit learning system. This is a company, Adafruit. They're based out of Brooklyn. It's a hipster electronics company. It's woman-owned company. Lady Ada runs it, named after Ada Lovelace. But the learning system is their very transparent method of selling you stuff by telling you how to use it. So they'll be like, how do you use this crazy glowing thing? Here's 15 steps, detailed, illustrated, how to do it. 0 to 60. That's mostly how I learned electronics, to be honest with you. They're great, and they sell you all the things you need. So if you're like, oh, I want to make this project for like a glowing brooch, click buy. And then they tell you how to do it. Hack Club, I'm not as familiar with this, but I hear it's good for teenagers. It's like a community building apparatus where like you can be at high school and decide you need nerdy friends and start a hack club, and they will send you materials and money and help you build a hack club at your school. Live coding community on Reddit is great for that. If you want to learn how to do the scary VGA live coding, it is cool. It's fun. I didn't mean to make it so scary. I'm just personally very in my own business about coding. Mastodon. If you're a nerd, get on Mastodon. If you're less of a nerd, get on Blue Sky. Both of these are fabulous communities for people who are, how do I put this, like open to trying new forms of art. Not necessarily professionals too much, but like people who are interested in getting feedback and just like having open conversations about their art and just like throwing it out there. It's like DeviantArt used to be. It's just like a healthy, wholesome vibe. And, you know, there's a ton of weirdos. I count myself among those numbers. They're both joyous in their own way. And then the last one I think is Hackaday, which is a daily website that's a little bit, the community is so-so, but they run a lot of electronics projects, and it can be really interesting inspiration. It sounds like there's 1 hack per day, but there's like 12. They featured my stuff a bunch, which I'm always flattered, but it's just like, it's a nice taste of what's possible to be like, wait, you can use radios with Furbies? It's fun. I love that stuff. That concludes the formal spiel. So,
Great. So originally we were thinking maybe after the talk, Chris and I could have a dialogue, but he really answered all the questions, except for 2. Technology.
Sorry.
That's okay. And so the first question I have for you is, what is your relationship to smartphones?
Yeah, it's just as unhealthy as everyone else is, honestly. I think that for me, taming notifications was like a good enough step, like turning off almost all notifications. Highly recommend that if you haven't done it. Hygiene, smartphone hygiene. Just like keep that lock screen clean. You don't need to see that stuff. You don't need it. If something pops a notification, turn it off forever. I recommend it highly. I do think that part of sort of my goal as an artist is to help us see the ways that the world has changed around us, because there are so many ways to, just to get all urbanist for a second, like the built environment online has changed so much around us. I want to make artworks that pull out little bits of that and make it clear, like how prevalent is facial recognition? What? Or there are license plate scanners on all major streets going into every major city in the US? What? That's whack. So I want to make artworks about these things. And the goal of those artworks would be to have you second guessing when you're like, do I want to give this free Compass app my location data? So ideally, I would practice as much as I preach. I do a little more of the preaching than practicing, but I try. And that's a little is better than none.
Have you heard of the website Forensic Architecture?
It's been a while. I feel like, I think so, but I'd love to revisit it. Thank you for the prompt.
Yeah, just as you were talking. My second question was, regarding points of sale.
Yes.
So as I pass by the gallery and I stop and I read something on the screen, my reaction is usually, damn it. Could you tell us a little bit behind what's behind the thought process that went into creating this statement?
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, I will say that artwork is sort of an exception for me, because as much as I want to dwell in these sort of dark places of these cynical moments of being like, you guys, the world is going to hell. We don't want that. Like, in news, we call this like eating your vegetables. Like, you get a little bit of terrible news, but you also want a little bit of dessert, you know? So like, I try to include more dessert with most of my artworks. Point of sale is an exception. That one's just cynical. And I don't know if it's as effective as it could be. I think there are a few moments in it, some of the messages I'm like, kind of get the joke there, but it could be funnier, and it would probably be more effective if it was.
Well, it's kind of like the movie Idiocracy. It was funny 20 years ago. It's not so funny anymore.
I know. Word.
So, yeah.
Yes, it is very much a moment in time of March 2020.
Yes, that's very true. Well, I do have other questions, but I'm going to actually open it up to the crowd. So it's both.
Yeah, hold both of them. Okay, so I came in late. Maybe you spoke of this crypto. The feel something, and the fact that Wednesday the banana taped to the wall sold for 6.2 million in crypto, and it was it was the only piece in the auction that was allowed to be sold in crypto. And the fact that there are coffee shops opening in town, and if you walk in with money, they cannot take it, or they cannot give you change. You have to have exact change. So you didn't. I came in late, and
I didn't
mention crypto, because to me that's a big piece about crypto, and you're actually buying an experience with change, money, and there is a huge tidal wave coming of people who are going to tell you that nobody uses that stuff anymore. And if Trump replaces the head of the SEC with someone who determines that crypto is the same thing as gold or pork bellies, we're screwed. And I personally believe that there's still value to a quarter. And I think that you're creating something that's really important in the fact that you're buying this experience in real life, and something that you're actually combating AI in that, and that you cannot do this from your computer screen or your smartphone, because you're actually live, and you can only do it live in person. And you're doing it. And there are a lot of people who aren't thinking about this. They want to immediately create something online because they want, if you have 30 million followers or 30 million thumbs up, it must be good, you know.
I wouldn't mind having 30 million followers.
You know, whatever.
I'm sure it'd be great.
The fact that there's a small crowd here, you know, you captured an audience, and you're capturing something.
Small but mighty.
You did say you could shake the quarters out, but do you, okay, that piece doesn't sell. Do you keep the quarters? Do you give the quarters? Do you donate the quarters to the art space? Or
good logistical question. I'll start with that one because it's easier. So the way that I worked it out, just open books. I provided $18 worth of quarters at the front desk. There's a little box up there. And I said, here's the value going in, and I'll get back whatever comes back. So in general, I would imagine.
Were you imagining that most people won't have change?
So yeah, to that point, actually, it was really interesting showing this for the first time at the University of Maryland, where it was experienced by tons of students who do not interact with metal monies. There was a point at which I realized, oh my God, I'm doing an old thing. So it means something different. It hits different. Like, I think you're right. Like, just having like the physicality of putting the thing in there. I like that feel. It is too fluid sometimes to spend when there's no physical thing leaving your hand. We've all been there, I think. So I really wanted to have that tactile quality to giving something from yourself to it. And then maybe being dismayed, maybe joyed. I don't know. People who are like dog people are like, ugh. So that's interesting. And I think that like cryptocurrency, you know, we all have our forecasts. My personal take, I don't judge individual people who have made a lot of money off of it. I think that in general, the industry is huffing its own fumes, and that AI, it's impossible. See, it just like takes up all the oxygen. The wave of coming products in that industry that shall not be named are repurposing disused equipment that was purchased to make crypto stuff. So it's just a grift upon a grift. I don't think it's going anywhere serious for our like economy. Personally, I'd love to be right about that. I don't know, obviously. There's a lot in flux. But it's just as, it's in some ways like the qualities of tactility and sort of personal surrender of a thing. It's just as bad as Visa entered in your phone. You know, it's just like paying with a credit card is just as fluid, just how they want it. Capitalism, money. So yeah, there was a middle question too, and I forgot it. Oh yeah, cool.
Didn't have a question mark.
Oh, cool.
I wanted to add that I learned the other day what it costs to, I guess, create cryptocurrency. In about 10 minutes takes as much energy as a house would need to power itself for a whole entire day. So,
and that cost is incurred every time someone transacts with it. It's not just to create it, but like when you pay with Bitcoin, you're using an enormous amount of fossil fuels, like around the world.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there for anyone who was on the fence. Like, yikes. Same with generative AI. Crap, I did it again.
What's your take on NFTs, and have you created any if you are okay with it?
I think similar kind of circumstance of like the people pushing it are generally speaking tech bros, and the people profiting from it are generally tech bros and not necessarily artists. So it's kind of like, it's another expression of I will make up a thing and it is worth something. But I make up things every day and they are worth things. Like fundamentally, when I make a physical sculpture, that's what it was. I'll get back to that. When I make a physical sculpture, it is also made up. Like it does not have value beyond what someone ascribes to it. I would love for anyone to be able to say, hey, that sculpture is worth this. Everything is made up, but that's not to say like there is equivalency in these things. I think that NFTs in particular, as used as financial vehicles, which is the majority of such uses, NFTs as financial vehicles are morally bankrupt. Putting that out there. Again, not judging individual artists. I really am not in that business. But if you are creating a digitally unique thing, that's actually something that's just done every day by people using computers. Like when you create a certain type of login, an SSH key, it's supposed to be basically unique, and you're making like a unique thing, and that's useful and valuable. So in theory, you can have digital things that are cryptographically unique and are not being used to buy someone a Maserati. I'm cool with that. I don't know how to really do it, and I haven't looked into it.
Any other questions?
I think I'm way over on time. Thank you.
We are thrilled. Thank you so much, Chris. We really, really appreciate this. This was incredible. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming.